Dan Perkins, you're a Trump supporter. Where's the off-ramp here? Because, you know, we have heard of more conciliatory voices even within the Trump administration. We've heard it from James Mattis, the defense secretary. We've heard it from the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, talking about putting diplomacy ahead. Yet in the latest rhetoric we've heard from US President Trump, diplomacy doesn't really get a mention.
Maybe it's because it hasn't worked in the past. Bill Clinton, when he was president, made a deal with the North Koreans that if they would stop their nuclear testing, he would provide $4 billion in food. Didn't stop them. Right. So how do you trust them? And the other thing that's very important, is that we're talking about 40, 50, 60 years ago. Today we're dealing with nuclear weapons at risk. That's a lot different than what happened 50 years ago.
But Dan, I'm going to follow up with a quick question to you, because even though, and it's widely acknowledged, I think, around this table and elsewhere, that the Clinton administration failed, that the George W. Bush administration failed, that the Obama administration failed, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the Trump administration can't fail either. And there's this feeling that the rhetoric may actually lead to a worse outcome, a war, and the consequences haven't been thought through by the president, because any armed response could lead to a conventional arms attack on Seoul, for example, and a massive escalation, for example, as this Chinese editorial said. So has he factored all that in?
Let me give you a number. Right now, the exports from North Korea to China represent about $2.8 billion. China exports to the United States in 38 hours more than what they import from North Korea. This is an economic issue, and China understands the importance of trade. They wouldn't have voted along with Russia on a 15-0 vote at the UN Security Council to put more pressure on North Korea. Well, so go ahead.
So I just want to correct you there, because they have actually voted with Russia and all the other 14 members of the Security Council on many other resolutions beforehand, which have been put pressure on the DPRK. I just want to go to San Francisco and Xiaochen Zhang. Dan makes the argument that China should cooperate because there's very little trade there, and they don't have an interest to go along with the US because they also don't want proliferation. But there is a strategic argument here too, isn't there, in the Korean Peninsula?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are several issues related to this. The first one is that from the humanitarian concern, that if the sanction just or no trade and also no food go and energy go to the country, and the regime may collapse, and also there will be potential refugee and other related issues will occur, which will just have a huge impact. The second part is that if to just go beyond what UN resolution was about, and just impose more and more than what the UN resolution already agreed upon, that we just create a system which is beyond what all parties have agreed upon.
Let's go back to Myung-Koo Kang, but beforehand, I just want to play a clip of President Trump that we've heard in the last few hours. He's also going to start, he's consulting with leaders around the world, and we just want to get your reaction, Myung-Koo Kang, off the back about what the leaders in the region should say. Let's take a listen.
Thank you, everybody. We had a very good meeting. We talked about North Korea, as you can imagine. We're very much in agreement. I think we're very unified, and we have been right from the beginning. This is something that has to stop. We all feel that very strongly. I will be speaking to President Xi tonight from China, and we've been working very closely with China and with other countries. That phone call will take place tonight.
So we'd all like to be in on that phone call, I'm sure. Myung-Koo Kang, obviously he's going to be speaking to President Xi, also new President Moon in the Republic of Korea, probably Prime Minister Abe. What do you think leaders in the region are saying?
I think basically they would say to President Trump that President Trump should not confuse with moral judgment with strategic judgment. So from a moral standpoint of view, North Korean regime is a horrible regime. More than half of North Korean people still are suffering from lack of food, malnutrition problem, going on among children. And also, more than half of North Korean people cannot even access to basic medical services at all. So considering all these factors and issues, North Korean regime is a horrible, a evil kind of regime. But at the same time, such kind of moral judgment or moralizing international relations, politics can be really dangerous. So from a strategic point of view, President Trump or United States should need to calm down and calculate the overall situation. So right now, North Korean threat is not an imminent threat at all. It's a kind of chronic disease. It's been there for a while, and we have tried to resolve the situation. So if President Trump tried to resolve the situation immediately, there is only military option. But military options, consequences so catastrophic. Everybody is fully aware of that. And that's the reason, the past administration here in the United States, they tried to expand, sanctions, increase sanctions, and then expanding this, deterrence, even trying to build a more strengthened, missile defense system. So we need to deal with the North Korean crisis, more long-term perspective, not expecting any kind of immediate solution. So stabilizing the Korean peninsula or the ongoing crisis, or de-escalating the crisis itself would be very important. But President Trump seems to talk too much, only targeting his supporters here in the United States, not those people living on the Korean peninsula or China or Japan. I think that's a very serious problem and issue.
Brian, let's just also think, though, about where the DPRK threat is, because Myung-Koo Kang came up with this idea that really it's been like this for a long time. But we have seen a breakout in terms of technology used by the DPRK in both its ballistic missiles and also, if we believe American intelligence, miniaturization of nuclear warheads. And then this very precise warning that they're going to present this plan to fire an intermediate range missile, 4 of them, in the waters around Guam. Why are they doing this at this time? Is it to get the US's attention, or is it just to outdo Donald Trump? Put us in the mind.
I think, I mean, if you look at the map, Guam is closer to Australia and New Zealand than it is to the state of California, even though it's a U.S. territory. It's been a colony since 1898. Yeah. It's in that area. It's used as a launching pad. It was used as a launching pad for the U.S. war in Vietnam, the war that Donald Trump made sure not to serve in and got lots of deferments. Well, but I'm just saying, it's easy to go to war when you don't have to go to war. Right. So now we have Guam. Well, what's the DPRK really doing? They're saying to Trump, who's escalating the rhetoric, we can strike you in multiple ways. This is not going to be just Koreans bleeding. You too will bleed. In other words, they're trying to muster their forces to show a deterrence. Now, I think what's happening in Washington, D.C. is that there are 2 camps, and Trump represents one of these camps. Lindsey Graham does too. They feel that war with North Korea is actually inevitable, and it's better to go to war now, sooner, before North Korea develops more missiles, more nuclear technology, in other words, has a greater deterrent capability. This was the same kind of thinking that existed in the 1950s when China got nuclear weapons. This is what started the great crusade against, quote, Red China, when Mao Zedong and the Chinese leadership got nuclear weapons, and part of the military-industrial complex in America said, we can never live with that threat. But you know what? Ultimately, they came to terms with China on a different basis, and the U.S. could do that too. But we have to be worried right now that there's a wing of the military establishment that says war is inevitable, let's do it sooner, because North Korea will only be stronger later.
Dan Perkins, do you agree with that assessment, that there's an element of the White House that basically thinks the war should happen now because the DPRK will only get stronger?
No, and one of the panelists a few moments ago made a wonderful point. The point is that this leader cares nothing about life and the people of his nation. He talked about the lack of food, medical care, many of these things. He's channeling all of his resources into his military program. Okay, that is unprecedented. And what we don't know is when he presses the button, is it a test or is it a missile coming towards Guam or the United States?
So the threat is real. What I'm saying is the threat of war back more real than it's been before?
Absolutely, I think it is.
That's the two lines.
Because there are nuclear weapons involved.
And you think that the Trump administration would follow through with a potential plan? Because you would have to, in nuclear theory, you have to take out all those nuclear weapons. You have to also disable their conventional weapons to hit Seoul for real success. Otherwise, you're going to create some sort of counterstrike capability which could blow up the whole region. You think that's worth it?
I think before this is all said and done, North Koreans and Americans are probably going to die.
Okay, well, Myung-Koo Kang, it's not seen that way on the Korean Peninsula in the south, isn't it? Even though they're worried about the rhetoric, they do feel that this will blow over. Is that naivety, or just they've been through this before? What's the feeling as we go into this long weekend? Okay,
the basic misunderstanding going on here in the United States that the North Korean regime will attack with a nuclear, ballistic missile once they have the capability. I think that's a fundamental misconception or misunderstanding. North Korean regime, of course, repeatedly, used some threats, but we need to think about what is the fundamental motivation of developing nuclear weapons and ICBM. So basic thing is that 10% North Korean people, those people living in Pyongyang area, Korean Workers' Party members, they are enjoying privileged life there. And then Kim Jong-un has absolute power. So if North Korean regime attacks South Korea or Japan or United States, those leaders in North Korea, they are fully aware of that. American military capability, allied forces that can definitely annihilate the regime on Earth. So they are fully aware of such kind of situation. So imminent threat and then now or never kind of amplifying the current crisis, I think that's a fundamental misconception, misunderstanding going on right now.
Brian Becker, in your opinion, then, is that the Trump administration miscalculating basically the needs from Pyongyang, security, and also, although they say it in a different way rhetorically, it's their deterrence.
Exactly. It's the ideology of the Cold Warriors, as I mentioned before. They think war is inevitable. Let's get it over with now. And what the DPRK really wants is not war, because they will be destroyed, as the other speaker said. What they really want is normal relations with the United States. They would become a great friend of the United States. We said before, China would never be a friend of the United States. Red China, but guess what? It became a, quote, friend. That could happen with the DPRK.
Fantastic panel. I hope we'll be back next week talking about this, and let's hope there's some positive signals coming out of the region and also here in Washington, D.C. That's it for another edition of The Heat. I'm Nathan King in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.